it is traumatizing for the kids to be so sick and to see a parent that's so sick and to have to go through such dramatic. It's almost like, I don't know, going through a war zone in a way. Like their life feels so unstable, so unsettled. I would definitely have done things differently looking back, but I was
what
in survival.
What would you do differently?
I think I would have talked to them about it a little bit differently and tried to be more reassuring.
Internationally respected physician, researcher, author, and educator, Dr. Ann Shippy creates extraordinary wellness for her patients by using cutting-edge science to find and treat root causes, not just symptoms, of illness. Board certified in internal medicine and a certified functional medicine doctor, Dr. Ann Shippy worked for a decade as an IBM engineer. She's known as the doctor's doctor, who solves medical problems with brilliance and compassion. Welcome, Dr. Ann Shippy, to Take Back Your Health with Dr. Amy Myers. Well, today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to both share our experiences with toxic mold and how it's shaped us as people, shaped our practices, shaped our relationships with others, shaped our entire world. So instead of just being a one-on-one interview where both Ann and I have been in this together for so many years that we're both going to just talk and do as much as we can to try to help people out there that are suffering from mold toxicity.
It is really kind of amazing how we've been on this parallel journey and have been able to really help each other in so many ways through this process of learning how to really get through toxic mold.
Absolutely. So our guest today is Dr. Ann Shippy, who is not only a dear friend, but a well-regarded physician, functional medicine physician, and expert in toxic mold. So welcome to Take Back Your Health.
Thanks for having me.
Well, before we get started, you want to tell, listeners who aren't familiar with you just a little bit about your background, how you got into functional medicine, and then, you can segue into perhaps your first mold exposure.
So I was so happy as an IBM chemical engineer on the fast track, getting into management and really changing the face of how in manufacturing technology we use chemicals. Like we were really doing things that were very advanced in helping to get chemicals out of the manufacturing process. And I did it for almost 10 years and then suddenly went on vacation, came back, and I was so sick. I went from doctor to doctor and couldn't get answers about how to get my health back on track. And it was before the internet, so it was quite a while ago. I couldn't Google. So I would read books and then try outside the box thinking. So I went to a naturopath and a nutritionist, an acupuncturist. I tried Ayurvedic medicine, like just everything that came across my path to try to figure out what was wrong with my body. I knew I could get it better. There was always this knowing that I was fine before, I can figure it out. And so then when I did, by getting all the right pieces of the puzzle together, I woke up one morning and I decided I was going to go to medical school so that I could do medicine differently, which sounds a little strange, right? You're going to go into this field that didn't solve the problem. But I knew that if I used this problem-solving ability, like as a chemical engineer, that's what you do. You solve problems on the human body, that I could really make a difference.
Well, so, that's great. I did, somewhat similar that we both, went back to medical school somewhat later. I was in my 30s. How old were you in your 30s, which is tough. And I, too, knew that I wanted to, now I know it's called functional medicine, but back then I didn't know that it was called functional medicine. But I, too, went into medicine with this idea that, I went into medicine with a different way of thinking. Now, how was that for you? For me, it was very difficult, right, to endure these long lectures and then ultimately residency, knowing that I really wasn't ultimately going to practice this way. How was medical school for you?
I still
residency.
Yeah, I still loved it.
Oh, good.
because I felt like I was learning so much about the human body. And I'm so grateful, even, every day of my practice to still have the allopathic model, because there are certain times where you really need it. And I had such great professors, instructors, mentors for that piece of the puzzle. Just really inspiring, beautiful humans. And then I really complicated it because I had a baby in med school and then another one in residency.
That's tough.
It was tough. But then, I was getting older. So I was also worried about, am I ever going to, if I don't do it now, is it going to ever happen? So
Right.
I was just really grateful to get the kids. But then when I was done with residency, it was before functional medicine was on the map. And I had these two little kids. I had a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old. So I did actually, even though I knew I was getting off my path, I did practice allopathic medicine for 3 years, which was soul-sucking. The office manager was always on me because I was always behind because I loved spending time with my patients. I couldn't do the 10-minute visit and see 20 patients in a day and really feel good about what I was doing. You had to know, what prescription are you going to write within a minute of talking to the patient. And so fortunately, I developed a couple of autoimmune disorders. I had really severe Sjogren's. I couldn't wear my contacts anymore. I had to chew gum all the time because I couldn't make any saliva. And then the scarier part was I developed antiphospholipid antibodies. So I was at risk for stroke, heart attack, all the clotting issues. So I got back on my path again by finding functional medicine, finding a doctor down in San Antonio, because it was still so obscure at that time, 20 years ago. And so I had to find a doctor I luckily found somebody who was practicing that way, got me putting the puzzle pieces together again, and then go do that training. Which at that time, functional medicine, there were 40 of us in a...
It was so fun back then, right? There were so few people and we all knew each other so well. And the conferences were nice and small. Now it's great that it's expanded and growing and that there are more and more doctors, but the conferences are so huge these days. So, again, very similar paths. I didn't have 2 children in residency, but I finished in emergency medicine because I felt like that was the only thing that I could believe in allopathic medicine, right? If you're shot or you're in a car accident, you want to go to the ER. And I, too, worked for 3 to 5 years in the ER before eventually getting back to, my route as well. I had already developed Graves' disease and knew that conventional medicine had failed me. So then you started taking your training in functional medicine. And how was that in the ER, I was able to just get out of the ER, right? I did 20 shifts a month or 15, then 10, then 5. And eventually I didn't have a practice that I had to leave or convert. So how did you go about doing that?
It really was one of the scariest things that I've ever done because functional medicine wasn't on the map yet significantly. And I had to get off insurance plans because I knew I couldn't do the insurance model and spend the time with the patients that I knew I needed to apply the functional medicine. So I took a few months break, got off all the insurance plans, and then found a teeny little office. It had 4 rooms. I didn't hire anybody at first. In this office, you had to know where I was. The drug reps could not find me because you had to count the driveways, turn down a little alleyway, and finally end up in a little parking lot and trees up on a hill. And I just started talking about it. I went to the compounding pharmacies. I went to the school, just started sharing what I was doing. And all of a sudden I had a waiting list. I had to start hiring people to help me. And it just took off really, really quickly because people started feeling better and they started talking about it. And then they wanted their spouses, their kids, their neighbors, their coworkers to come and see how they could actually heal their bodies, not just Band-Aid it.
Right. And, I moved to Austin in 2008. So you must have already been in practice at least a couple of years, right? When did you start?
Let's see, that would have been, 2004.
Okay. Yeah, because I too went around to the pharmacies, did all the things, and everybody would say, well, do you know Dr. Ann Shippy? It's like, not yet, but I've heard so much about her. And you were just so wonderful in, welcoming me and, really treating me as a colleague and a friend right off the bat instead of, there I was too, a cash-based practice, and somebody easily could have thought of me as a threat or competition or something of the sort, and you didn't. And, you were always willing to help. And, we, over the years, referred people back and forth when we sort of got to a plateau with one another. And you are most definitely the person who introduced me to the possibility of mold with my patients. So we can absolutely get into that. But I'm so thankful for you.
I'm so thankful for you too, to have a colleague that is so like-minded and helping people in such a similar way was just,
So let's get into it. So when you got sick way back when, before you even went to medical school, was that mold exposure back then, or was that something else?
Looking back at the time, I think it probably was a piece of the puzzle because we had built this house and there were some issues with the roof. And the builder just, in the process of trying to fix the roof, just repainted. And so we had no idea that there was probably mold in the house, but it was more complex than that. I had undiagnosed celiac disease and probably some issues with the microbiome. I still had a mouthful of amalgam fillings. I probably hit the perfect storm.
Yeah, as many of us did, right? I tell everybody it could be one or two of these things, or you could have all of them. And I myself have, I think, had all of them, so I totally get it. So I remember, because I had amalgam fillings and I have mutations at MTHFR, and so I don't clear heavy metals. I had every Wednesday for 3 months, I had shot day or vaccination day when I was in the Peace Corps in Paraguay. And so, I was a vegetarian for many years, so I was eating a lot of tuna fish. And so I had heavy metals as being one of my underlying, amongst many things, of SIBO and candida and, gluten sensitivity. And so I really, everybody that was coming into my clinic, I was pretty clear, okay, this is mercury toxicity, go over to Dr. Nunley, get your amalgams out. And then we had a mutual friend, I believe he was a patient of yours, and he was telling me all about mold toxicity. I was like, oh, no. It's that thing in functional medicine where it was like nobody had Lyme in my clinic either for a long time until I met Dr. Taryn Ingalls and had someone to refer them to, because it's that idea that, I didn't want to go there because it was sort of too scary. I didn't know anything about it. And then you and I met, you really, spoke to me about mold, and then suddenly, the floodgates opened. I myself had it, other people had it. So why don't we get into what are some signs and symptoms that somebody may have that could be a sign of mold toxicity or exposure to toxic mold?
So it's so fascinating because mold is so many different toxins. And then the human body being so unique, it can be so different in each person. But for me, when I was learning about it, I started losing my hair. Like just falling out in clumps. I was so exhausted. I could hardly get out of bed on Monday morning. Like just hard to function. I was not sure how I was going to make it through the day. And I had so much pain in my body that I didn't even want my kids to hug me. Like it hurt to be hugged.
Wow.
Yeah. I had to quit wearing heels. Like my just everywhere in my body hurt, but especially certain joints. And I didn't want to acknowledge it at the time. This is probably the first time I've even said this out loud, is definitely some brain fog. Like just what we do with our patients is so complex, right? There's so much information to consider to develop an ongoing plan for them. And I do think it was a little bit harder to like not quite as quick in getting the plans together and seeing. But I got so fortunate once again. I had gone to a conference by Bill Ray, an environmental health conference. This was like 4 or 5 years into practice, and I was still like, I want to learn everything possible every minute. And he had talked about toxic mold in this conference, and I was like,
Bill Ray.
he introduced the idea of toxic mold, and it was fascinating because I was like, oh, I might be missing this in some of my patients. This is like 4 or 5 months before I got sick. So I started seeing, oh my gosh, this is actually one of the root causes that I need to address for some people. But again, when it happened to me, there wasn't anything obvious going on in my house, so it didn't cross my mind. So I had this patient, Suzanne, who I had really helped her with multiple chemical sensitivity. But prior to her coming to me, she had had a run-in with Chitomium, one of the toxic molds. And she had come in for a visit, and she said to me, Dr. Shippy, I can tell you're really sick. I thought I had it all together. And she's a very petite woman, and she's like, what time do you get off work? I'm coming to your house after work because you have toxic mold in your house. What an angel, right? Like, she loved me so much that she stuck her neck out, stuck it into my business, and she came to my house, and within 10 minutes she had to run out because some first symptoms from the toxic mold started to come back. And I listened to her advice. I was so scared that she's like, don't take any belongings other than what you can put in the dishwasher, take your kids, and don't come back, kind of thing. And so I had to navigate through that process of releasing belongings, which I know is one of your stories too, but this particular mold really grows into things and you can't clean it very well. And, but within a month, I started feeling dramatically better. So I knew that I was on track, but at that point, I didn't know very much about mold, about how to act, the right ways to test and the right ways to detoxify and to rebuild. So it was a bit of a learning curve, but very quickly I started to feel an improvement in my body just by getting out of the mold.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the hardest things. And there's so many things that I want to talk about with that, having 2 small children, a husband who may or may not have, felt anything. So we'll definitely dive into all of that. So back to symptoms, I agree, with my patients, I saw so many different symptoms, right? From anxiety to depression to ADHD in children. Of course, all the, depending on the autoimmune symptoms. For me, personally, I break out in like a histamine rash. It's a very fine rash that most people can't even see, but I just feel like my skin is on fire and I can't get relief. In fact, I became so sensitive that, I would have patients come in and without even testing, I would just say, let me tell you what your problem is because I can feel it all over you, right? And so, but that was about it, other than the one house that I was in, an old house in Terrytown that I too, which is when I think I involved you and Suzanne, and I too felt so drugged. I mean, I could not get out of bed, drugged. And my dog, who was 13 at the time, had incontinence. And of course, she was 13, so I take her to the vet, and they just said, oh, she's 13. Well, literally the day that we got out of that house and moved, in, luckily a friend took me in, and literally the next day, my dog never had incontinence again. And so, yeah.
Well, and that definitely happens in humans. I think it's part of the body trying to detoxify. It can really irritate the bladder. Mm-hmm. So having an irritable bladder is when people come in and saying, I'm having trouble with incontinence or just urgency, it is really something to consider.
And pets and small children, their cup can fill up much more quickly.
The canaries.
So, and then for me, it's, like these spotted hands, almost like Raynaud's, but it's not cold. And then, my autoimmune markers go up. So really for me, it's, I have to check my autoimmune markers. I mean, in some ways, like you have this very intense reaction. And, mine is sometimes more subtle, but I can just see it in my labs that even though I don't seem as sick, my labs, my autoimmune markers are just, starting to go. I too had some Sjogren's markers starting to go up in another house that I was in. Dry eyes, literally in the middle of the night, had to put drops in, moved out, and within days, if not a day, no longer had to put drops in my eyes. And Sjogren, and they were never positive, but, it's that spectrum. So I think to those listening, the symptoms can pretty much be anything. I mean, I think, and the symptoms can also be very much like Lyme. What I distinguished between the two of them is often that Lyme is a little more cyclical. It's something that isn't always there. And so as long as you're in the environment, typically people's symptoms remain rather constant, unless it's something like you go to your beach house and you only have the symptoms there. But otherwise, Lyme tends, in what I saw, tend to be more like an infection that would sort of come and go. But often the symptoms can be similar in people. I don't know.
Definitely. And a lot of times I think about Lyme as being a little bit like shingles and herpes and some of these like low-grade chronic infections that only rear themselves when the immune system isn't working. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times just by dealing with the mold, the Lyme can go into remission.
Of course. Yeah. Okay, well, let's talk about this because I have been through toxic mold exposure alone and with a 13-year-old dog. I've been through it with a husband, and I have now been through it with a husband and a child. And each of those experiences were vastly different. And I would certainly say, and I may end up crying here, that going through it with a child and trying to preserve their belongings and their environment and stability was so challenging and really all, besides my own health, really the thing that mattered to me most. So it sounds like when you went through it with 2 children and a husband.
Well, I was divorced at the time.
Okay.
So, but 2 children, they were 8 and 12. And I feel like I'm so actually
glad we have the tissues here because I might need one. Okay.
I kind of feel a little bit like, sometimes as parents, like we're the canary for our child. My youngest son was in 3rd grade at the time, and he was really struggling. Mm-hmm. We had gotten called in by his teacher that he was really disrupting the class. So I think he was having a lot of the histamine stuff. He wouldn't put his shoes on. His skin was so uncomfortable. The tags, everything, everything had to be just right. But what was really getting affected was his emotional being and his brain. So anytime she would start to teach a new concept, he would be so uncomfortable. He'd have to move around the room because his brain wasn't working. And she was like, we just can't have this, right? It's disrupting the whole class. He was really not doing well. And
so something that could have been diagnosed as ADHD, right? I mean, potentially. I mean, or there are probably many children that are being diagnosed with ADHD or ADD, and it's really, well, we know that there are many underlying causes of that.
Right. And maybe even a bit of the PANS-PANDAS kind of neuropsychiatric. And so as we were delving through this house, what we realized had happened is there was a flashing on the chimney that wasn't done correctly. So when it rained certain angles, water would pour in down the chimney, down the back of the wall of his bedroom and bed and underneath, but not enough to show through the paint or the carpet. So he was basically, his bed was on a mold factory.
Right.
So the amazing thing that happened, so this was I think an October timeframe that we had this meeting with the teacher. I moved out in the November timeframe. By the time we had the next conference with the teacher in January, she's like, everything's so much better. So, with a child, you kind of have to do the detox stuff very gently, but just the little bit that I was doing by giving him a little bit of glutathione, working on the microbiome in his nose, and just getting him out of there. And we really did just replace everything. I know with your situation, you were really concerned about preserving things, but it was really fascinating. Both of my kids didn't really care about having things, but they were a little older. They were 8 and 12. They hardly wanted any of their stuff.
Well, I think intuitively they probably knew it was making them sick. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've found often, the child that's about 8 to 12, when I would see them, and maybe they came in and they got diagnosed with celiac or, severe food sensitivities. The parents were just so worried, how am I going to do this? And I was like, don't worry. Your child is old enough to understand that this causes their stomach to hurt, or this causes that headache, or this causes these symptoms, that brain fog and, all these things. And when they don't have it, it doesn't happen. And I often found that the children became the police. Elle has a dairy sensitivity, and it's not severe, and I'm okay with her having it every once in a while. But I'll say to her, like last night, we went out to the movies and she had a hamburger on a gluten-free bun. I said, they have real cheese. Do you want real cheese on your hamburger? And she'll stop and she'll think and she'll say, no, thank you. So she knows, like, if she gets a certain amount, her stomach's going to hurt, and she doesn't want to have it. She doesn't want her tummy to hurt. So
I find that too. But looking back, I do think it is traumatizing for the kids to be so sick and to see a parent that's so sick, and to have to go through such dramatic. It's almost like, I don't know, going through a war zone in a way. Like their life feels so unstable, so unsettled. I would definitely have done things differently looking back, but I didn't. I was in survival mode. I think I would have talked to them about it a little bit differently, and tried to be more reassuring. But I was at that point. I didn't know.
Right.
Well, okay. So the piece of my story that I left out is that I started having ALS type symptoms. So I had the fasciculations, the muscles jumping, and then my right hand got so weak, my right arm got so weak I couldn't hold a glass. And so I
very scary.
Was very, very scared and single. So that that's the positive and the negative of what I see some people go through. If they have a spouse that's really supportive, it makes a huge difference because they handle things, they are encouraging. When there's a spouse that's, that doesn't understand it yet, it's very, very challenging.
It's very challenging. And again, I think our patient population was similar in that, many of my patients were women. Probably 90% of my patients were women or children, and not men. And in many of those situations, it was the man who was the primary breadwinner. And so it often was very difficult, right? Here's the wife, she's sick. You've told them, because you've done it 100 times, as have I, you need to leave your house. You can bring nothing with you. I don't believe it can be remediated. This is so bad. You must leave everything behind. And then they go home and tell their husband or spouse, significant other, who's the breadwinner and has no symptoms. And they're thinking, this person is crazy. Why are you going to that doctor? So how do you advise your patients in navigating that? You were fortunate that you, in this case, were single. You were a breadwinner. In my case, I wasn't single, but I was the primary breadwinner, and I was the person with the knowledge base and had seen these things. So I was the decision maker. And, my husband, has, I might beg to differ that he doesn't have symptoms, but, there was no obvious symptom, related to these mold exposures that I had with him. And so, I literally, the second time that I really got exposed was in a home that he had bought. It was a brand new house. I too had Suzanne come over because I was, looking everywhere. Everywhere, and could find no cause of what had happened. And I had just released my first book. I had just gotten married. Was it stress? Was it this? Was it that? And finally, Suzanne came over, said it was a shower. We ripped open the shower, couldn't find anything. I just said, I'm out of here. And then I got so sick. I was literally sleeping on a balcony. So sick. I mean, that really is the sickest. I mean, I didn't have the symptoms that you had, but it really is the sickest I've ever been in my life. I thought I was going to die. I spent a month sleeping on a balcony because I couldn't tolerate anything. My chemical sensitivity kicked up. I had irritable bowel. I couldn't tolerate food. I couldn't tolerate chemicals. I was literally sleeping on a balcony.
I think that's a really important point because a lot of times mold is the tipping point of the toxins, right? There's been the mercury. There's been the pesticides we didn't know were going to be problematic, all the different chemicals and stuff. And so to have the chemical sensitivity is so common when people are recovering from mold.
I mean, I remember because I had to go to Target to get new clothes because I brought nothing with me. And I was like, I couldn't even, I really don't like going down the laundry aisle, but I can go down the laundry aisle and I can walk in a Home Depot now. I don't think it's good for you and I don't do it often, but I can tolerate those things now. I couldn't even tolerate the smell of new clothes in Target. I mean, I was so sensitive. I would just remember being in Target crying, thinking, I am one of my patients now. I am one of my patients. And I couldn't tolerate any food. I lost all this weight. I was sleeping on a balcony. It was our 1-year anniversary, and I'm literally sleeping on a balcony.
Oh, my gosh.
And, I couldn't tolerate the dog. I mean, it was just like I just literally thought I'm going to die here. Like I'm literally going to just die here and I'm never going to be okay. I mean, of course, we all, even us who've helped so many people get better and, gotten better, many times ourselves. It's just you can't help, when you're in that thing, just feeling so sorry for yourself. And it just, but back to, I literally just said to my husband, because though I had not been that sick before in my life, I had seen so many people in my clinic be that sick that once I knew there was this exposure, and again, that's where my Sjogren's and other antibodies were creeping up. I literally just said, Suzanne helped me find an apartment. And I just said, I'm gone. You can make the choice. You can come with me or you can stay. But this is literally like life or death for me.
What I find, though, just for the spouses listening, is that you might not have the same symptoms. You might not feel like you're affected. But when you're in a clean environment, when your body's detoxified and doing better, most people will notice some improvement. Like a lot of those people that didn't think they were being affected, they feel like their brain works better, their allergies are less, their fuse for frustration is longer. Most of them, once they actually start getting engaged and are willing to do what's necessary for their child or for their partner, find some silver lining and benefits for themselves as well. Plus, it's just not good for anyone, right? We know that these mycotoxins increase the risk for cancer, dementia, diabetes, autoimmunity. And we have an epidemic of each of those areas going on right now. We thought COVID was a bad thing. When you look at what's happening with autoimmunity, when you look at what's happening with dementia, we've got to get a handle on this. And I think when they started building buildings for all of the environmental factor or with conserving energy, we really misjudged our understanding of building science and how to build a healthy home.
And that is so important, right? I mean, here in Austin, Texas, it's hot, it's humid. The number of houses, because I've tried to find one, that doesn't already have mold in it. People think, oh, it's a brand new house. Well, I've seen houses being constructed and you see the mold on the wood because it arrived moldy. It sat in a pile. It rained. And then what you're referring to is they cover it all in the Tyvek. So it now has this basically a plastic sheathing in a hot, humid place, and it's just sprouting in there. And that's without even having built the home that somebody installed something incorrectly, which is notorious because building, at least around here, is going up so quickly. So, you haven't even moved in and turned on the plumbing yet, and you can already be in a house that has mold. And then your story is so classic of actually having a chronic ongoing leak that nobody can see, right? I mean, people, the first thing they say to me is, well, I haven't seen any. The number of people that I diagnosed with mold toxicity that actually saw the mold, I mean, I can probably count them on one, if not two hands. I mean, most people never see this mold. I mean, in many places it's hidden or it's microscopic and it hasn't even gotten to the place. I mean, if you open up something or you see it growing, my God, do you have a problem, right? Because that's how bad that is. But most people, again, I don't know your experience, but
Well, this is exactly like 4 years later, maybe it was more, maybe 6 years later. I thought I was moving into a clean place I was leasing, brand new, looked perfect. I got in, and a few months later, I developed asthma for the first time in my life. Like 80% of the buildings in Austin I could not go into. I would have to run out. Like I couldn't breathe. And then as I was looking at how they were constructing some of these other homes in the neighborhood, I was like, oh, that's exactly what you were saying, where the mold was already on the wood, on the 4x4s, and then they didn't do anything about it. They just kept building around it. And then they were putting, the flooring would get wet. They were multi-level homes, and the flooring would get wet, and they wouldn't dry it out before they put down the carpet.
Mm-hmm. Right? So, I mean, that's before you've even moved in, much less, we can talk about, all of the places where there's a penetration in a house, a window, a door, a fireplace, all of these things with flashing that don't get installed. I mean, what I've learned, which was the case in the shower that we had in the house that Javier had, was, one of those shower benches. I mean, it's literally just like Din's glass with perhaps, if they do it correctly, some little, thin layer of barrier, right? I mean, but water just sits there. It's in a shower. I mean, there's some very classic problems in homes.
So I've seen a number of people, including you, attempt to build a new home that's mold-proof. And even having extra inspectors, watching the construction. Like I have this one patient right now that they've been building for 3 years. They moved into a little RV on the property thinking that they were going to be done in like 9 months. And they've had to practically, as the house has been built, tear it down and rebuild it every step of the way. Like everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. But fortunately, they've caught it so that hopefully by the time they move in, it'll be okay. But is this a good time for you to share your story?
Sure, I'll share my story. So after sleeping on a balcony for a month, once I finally got well, I thought this is, we're in Austin where the houses are right next to each other, this shoddy construction. So we actually ended up buying a couple of acres here, and we're going through the process of getting an architect and, building a house. And then I thought, well, why am I even building here? I mean, it's just the allergies, the humidity. And so Javier and I went on a tour of the high desert. So if anybody doesn't know what that is, it's a desert that's higher in altitude. So it's not like being in Scottsdale or somewhere where Phoenix, where it's really, really hot all the time. You get these nice shifts in weather. And so it's cooler at night and it doesn't get burning hot during the day, but there's basically no humidity because it's the desert. Now, people think then you can't have mold because you're in the desert. But if you're in New Mexico, everybody's building houses with flat roofs. So that's a whole nother problem. And of course, you can get mold or toxic mold anywhere. So we end up buying some land in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and engage with a builder who touted themselves as knowing what was going on in terms of, actually he had worked with Paula Laporte, who wrote the book, How to Build a Healthy Home, which I think is a very good resource as a starting point. I mean, there's some things, that I disagree with in that book, such as she does put in central air and heat, which is, for me, a classic sort of no-no because you have a duct system. So if you have a leak over here, then, in this room, if you have a duct system and the AC on or the heat, it can carry the mold or the mold spores, around the home. And so we opted to not have that. She also, in some cases, uses rammed earth, which again, for me is a no-no because, earth is an organic material. And even though it's enclosed in clay and whatnot, it's, still has the ability to have mold. So we built a house out of pumice-crete, which is pumice and concrete. It's essentially they put these walls and pour the concrete and then it forms these really thick walls, and steel. And we don't have any sheetrock in the house. We have Dins glass as our ceilings. And so my requirement was every wall that had my requirement was every wall be pumice-crete. There were a few instances where they couldn't do that, but that every wall that had plumbing was in pumice-crete, so that my plumbing was in pumice-crete. And, thankfully I did that. My builder definitely cut a lot of corners. I believe he got in over his head. It was the most extensive project the largest project he had ever done. And as soon as they pressurized the house for plumbing, there were 3 leaks immediately. Now, the catcher is he didn't tell me about him, and he didn't tell the architect about him until about 10 days or 2 weeks later. He called to say there was going to be a delay, and I asked why, and he said, well, when they pressurized the house, there were these leaks. We corrected them, but now we see something weeping up the wall. And so I immediately got on a plane and called, our friend Eric Althouse, mold inspector. Because of how we built the house, and at that point the house wasn't finished out, we were okay. Then there were leaks in the radiant heat. I can go on and on about all of the leaks, but really what happened, I was so involved in this house, and really because of how we built the house, I do think I got closer than anybody I know, for sure, in creating. I mean, you came to visit, and there was a period, the first 6 months, where, there were all these leaks, but because of how we built it with it being in the cement, there wasn't anything to mold other than the cabinetry. But each of the leaks that happened at the cabinetry, we did catch right away, other than one in Elle's bathroom. That's sort of as they were remediating some other mold in my house, they found, that Elle's cabinet had been or the angle stop had been leaking. But anyway, I was so involved in this house, as you know. Every window, we have a metal roof. I met with the roofer about every penetration. I have him come back every year and check the roof. I mean, everywhere that I knew that there could be a leak, all of the windows have pumice-crete. The attention to detail, the time, the energy, the money that I spent to be so involved in this house. And years. And then we had an engineer design where the laundry vent would go and the dryer vent, and they didn't look at the plans. The builder didn't look at the plans, even though they received the email. The installer, Rich Duran, didn't look at the plans. The builder, Palo Santo Designs, didn't look at the plans. They admitted all this in depositions. And so instead of going out the wall, which was a horizontal run, they went up about 20 feet in the air, and it was these bins, and there was an elbow. And what was happening, which they actually saw during the build, it's the things that just get you so upset that someone actually saw this and didn't bring it to our attention, even though we met every Friday for 2 years. What was happening is, because it gets so cold at night in Santa Fe, it was condensating down this pipe and then sitting in the elbow because the water couldn't go anywhere. And then what we did was add a dryer. And so now we had hot air coming through, creating even greater differential. So there was this long pipe there was insulation at the top of the roof, but nothing in the pipe was insulated. So it was Christmas Eve, it's raining, it's freezing cold, and we're doing laundry, and the dryer is on, and suddenly it's literally just 1 or 2 drips of water. But what had happened is you have dryer lint coming in and condensation coming down, and it's sitting in this elbow. And over the 6 months that we had been in the house, the mastic broke down, water dripped through. They came in, opened the roof, convinced me that I couldn't possibly have mold in my house because of how I built the house. Meanwhile, dryer lint, water, food source, water, for, some period of, at least a couple of months. And then, mold spores all over my house. And we immediately left, went on vacation, and came back after Christmas. Well, I started getting in a rash right away. But then again, everybody's convincing me it's dust and building materials and whatever. Because again, people are just, I'll probably cry. You don't want to think this is happening to you again.
No, especially after all this.
After everything that I did. So I'm letting people, I don't want it to be happening to me. It is literally my worst nightmare. I mean, my worst nightmare after everything I've been through. And in this, I don't know about you, but I mean, I just lived in fear for so many years that, after you get rid of everything, all of the furniture I had was just inexpensive Target furniture. My clothes were shopping at Costco. I don't own anything nice because I'm lived in fear for so many years. And because you came to the house, I mean, I remember sitting there going, I did it. I made it. I achieved it. I can now buy something nice. And I did. I bought a whole house full of furniture, really nice furniture. And here it was, just yet again, I was like, I let my guard, I was so mad at myself. Like I let my guard down. I had nice clothes. I had nice furniture. I had nice things. I was settled in. I was so proud of myself. I remember sitting there on the 23rd of December, looking at the mantle, all of the monogrammed, stockings. And I was sitting there just going, I did it. I made it. Like, I am so happy. I was going to invest in a piece of art. I mean, we have nothing hung on any wall anywhere over any, for the last 10 years, because why hang anything? You're going to have to get rid of it, right? And I'm literally thinking, I can invest in a piece of art. And we were headed to a art gallery. The art director was over at the house when the water came. So we call the builder and he says, oh, well, the project manager thinks it's one of the pipes condensating. I said, what are you talking? We thought it was a roof leak because it's raining. So we're calling roofers and all this stuff. It's, of course, Christmas Eve. So who's calling you back? So the builder calls back. He said, oh, yeah, Brandon, he saw a pipe condensating during the build.
What?
So anyway, I mean, here I am in this situation. So we walk back in from vacation and I knew emphatically, I felt it. We walked through the door. I looked at my husband and I said, excuse my language here, oh, shit, we have a problem. Now, luckily, we had another home there that we, had invested in, and we were going to rent it as an Airbnb and hadn't yet. So we quickly moved back over there. And thank God, Elle was familiar with the house. It was a house that we came to over the last 4 years while we were building this house. But, it unraveled with, of course, Eric came up, tested. Yes, of course, there was molds. He had a baseline. These molds weren't there before. They were very particular molds from a water-damaged building. Luckily, there were no mycotoxins at this point. And so, all in this situation, as angry as I was getting and upset as I was getting, was thinking, well, thank God this reared its head right now, right? I mean, technically under my warranty still, although the builder walked off and didn't, anyway, that's a longer story. But during my warranty, I mean, this is the type of leak that could have killed me. I mean, this is the type of leak that if it didn't come through the ceiling that day, could have been years and years of me getting sick and not knowing why and thinking I built this house in this very specific way. It certainly can't be mold. And, and it was. But for me this time, instead of, my mold labs did, Ritchie Shoemaker labs all popped up. But this time I was diagnosed with PTSD. This time it wasn't the physical. I mean, of course, I got the rashes and I got the hand stuff and all the things, but my exposure wasn't that long because I recognized it so quickly by leaving. We went on vacation. But this time it was the PTSD, which I mean, to this day, I mean, I just told you we're going to go to Kenya and at the end of the year, and I got reduced to nothing. I couldn't work for 6 months. I mean, I'm a person, I have traveled the world by myself. And I flew to Austin to come get care from providers here. I had to take Xanax to get on the plane. And then I had to fly Javier and Elle down. I couldn't, even with the Xanax and going through EMDR therapy, I couldn't get back on the plane myself. This is an hour and 15-minute direct flight that I couldn't do by myself after literally traveling the world. And it is
Your nervous system was just
so shot.
fire.
Yeah.
To be in a space where you don't know if you can have a safe place to live. It is so traumatizing and it's so overwhelming.
I mean, it's back to, what is it? Maslow's, hierarchy of needs, not having a safe place. I mean, nobody could understand it. I mean, my husband could understand it. Elle didn't quite, know what was going on. She was so little at the time. I mean, she's just turned 7, so she must have been, 4 turning 5 when this happened. And, the hardest things were just knowing that, we left, we didn't take anything with us. And, we thought it was just going to be this quick sort of fix. I mean, really, we didn't even take any clothes or things. And we just abandoned the house. And she would say things like, Mom, I want this costume, my Cinderella costume and my Cinderella shoes. I know exactly where they are, Mom. They're, and she just was so emphatic of like exactly where they were. Meanwhile, I knew I had this other company come in out of Colorado called Ecotrex to clean the house, and they made it worse. They pulled everything out of the house. They contaminated things that were not contaminated. They threw everything in my garage. So I knew that her costumes and shoes were sitting in a bag next to hazmat suits, not properly sealed, used hazmat suits. And I knew that they were there. And she would just say, Mom, could you go get this for me? It's right here in my room. And I shielded her from all of it. I mean, she had no idea what was going on. And I couldn't go get those things for her. They had already been contaminated. They were, in the PTSD of seeing all your things, the smell of an air scrubber, the sound of an air scrubber, the smell of plastic, the plastic bins. I mean, the whole, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, others don't, but it's the whole experience and thinking that I was finally safe. I mean, this was going to be my safe space. I thought, okay, maybe in 20 years there'll be some kind of leak, right? I mean, I didn't think I don't know how many leaks it was, somewhere between 12 and 16 leaks within the first, before even moving in, frankly.
So do you want to talk a little bit about your journey for recovering from the PTSD? Because you're back to work and things.
Yeah, but yes. I mean, I'm not fully recovered. So, but I am probably about 80% of the way there. So in this situation, as I mentioned, it wasn't as much physical because I was not exposed. It was really this reliving of all of this stuff, getting rid of things, throwing things away, putting things in plastic bins. We had plastic barriers and air scrubbers all over the house. I mean, I couldn't go in the house without a hazmat suit on. So it was, all of that. And I did EMDR, which I had done very briefly, after my mom passed and for some, childhood, parents divorcing and things like that. And I guess maybe because those traumas were so old that I really didn't feel like it had helped. I only did a couple of sessions, but this one, it really, I think because it was such an acute trigger and it was so easy to trigger me and to get into that state of panic by thinking of these things. I mean, literally the word air scrubber, I mean, it still kind of gives me a chill down my spine, but I could easily tap into the trauma that it has been very successful for me this time around. This woman, Ginger Pong, who I see, she's incredible. I'll have her on at some point here in the future. And I even had her eventually, once we cleaned the house and moved back in, I flew her to Santa Fe, and she went around every room in the house with me and desensitized me to, I would just walk past the laundry room and I would look down the hall. I mean, I still have these moments. I mean, I eventually, actually my builder sued me, but I countersued my builder and have recently been victorious in settling with them. But, they questioned my diagnosis of PTSD, that I hadn't been in combat. And my therapist came and said, yeah, it's actually worse for her because she's living in the battleground. She's returned to the place of the trauma and she has to deal with it every day. I mean, Christmas, I've only had one since then, but it's very difficult for me. I mean, I got all new stockings, but it's still, it's that time of year that this happened. And so it's sort of reliving all of that. But I still need to carry Xanax with me. And it's something on the plane about, them shutting the door, and it triggers me of not being safe. And it's, not feeling safe in your own home. And I mean, if it, before the house got cleaned and I knew, because my experience is mold run. I couldn't run. I mean, I had invested so much time, so much energy, so much money into this project. Everyone was convincing me that this, it was mold spores. It wasn't mycotoxins. There's nothing for the mold to grow on. We're in a, low humidity place. The way I built the house, this place, it's just spores and it could be cleaned. But I didn't know. I had never experienced being able to remediate something. And most of my patients, I counseled them to run. And so it was an unknown for me, and it was really scary for me. And so the frankly, months that it took to get, because this other company had botched things, to then, get somebody who knew what they were doing and get it cleaned was a matter of months. And so the anxiety and the unknown of, was I going to have a safe place to live, obviously was traumatic. And then once I got in, I was still, I still have my moments of like, am I safe, right? I mean, I still have those moments.
Still test regularly?
No, we haven't. I mean, it's on the list to have, Eric come back. I test myself and my autoimmune markers and those things. And so are stabilizing, but it's that unknown. But anyway, EMDR was, extremely, I mean, amongst many other things, but I would say EMDR in this situation was really the thing. But I still have my moments in the house. I mean, one of the things they asked me in the deposition is, do I feel safe? And I said, no, not always. Do I feel comfortable living in my house? I don't remember the words. And I said, no, it's taken me a long time and I'm still not there to love my house.
Yeah. So for our listeners, like if Amy Myers has this much trouble building a place, like I know how much you research, like what materials to use, what the design should be, like all the things. If you can have this much trouble, like what do you say to me? Because I haven't been brave enough to try building something.
The one thing that I learned is our laundry room is in the middle of the house, and that you absolutely want to have your laundry room on an exterior wall. And that, they didn't look at the plans. They didn't follow the plans that the engineer had drawn, but still the laundry room was not designed on an exterior wall. And so that's something that I absolutely learned. And you want your laundry vent to be, as few bins as possible and to run horizontal and to have as short a run as possible. So that's what I learned from this. The other thing that I learned from this is I did have wood cabinets and I had angle stops, which is, I don't really know how to describe an angle stop, but the person who installed that didn't do that properly on virtually every toilet and every sink in the house. We had 6 sinks, and I think we had...
Oh, is that why you had all the leaks?
All the leaks. And they're these tiny little, again, if you don't look, it's a tiny little pinhole leak that can be the death of you, right? I mean, it's these tiny chronic leaks. It's not generally the one big leak that then you get in and somebody fixes it properly right away. It's these chronic low-level leaks that are continuing to get wood and other materials wet. So, there was this thought of doing metal cabinets, and I just thought that was overkill. because I had put all the plumbing in pumice-crete walls, right? I mean, I did not think that I would have an angle stop leak. I thought there would be some eventually over time breakdown of my pipes inside my walls, and them being in the pumice-crete would save me. And we actually had all these leaks right at where the piping comes out, and it would drip right onto the hole of the cabinet. So if I were to do it over again, I would have metal cabinets, because really, I mean, you can't do anything if somebody doesn't follow the plans, but I wasn't aware of what the plans were, and that was never brought up in a conversation. Other than that, the things that we did right in the house was to work out of pumice-crete. Now, that's a difficult thing in a lot of other states because it's not readily available. Now, there are a lot of different types of cement blocks that are, people are using. We had looked at a product called Bowtex, which is like igloo beads. What do you call that material? I'm not thinking of it. It's like that the igloos are made out of, the little styrofoam beads inside cement. And I originally was going to build out of that, and then I just worried that the styrofoam would off-gas or break down over time. And again, just like intuitively, there are all kinds of things. There's ones with wood chips. You, me, Suzanne, we've all felt those. I wouldn't do that. So some sort of cement block. And so that was done right. A metal roof with as few penetrations as possible. Metal windows. We had metal beams. Now, I do think the fact that I used DINS glass, which is usually what is used in a commercial building, and in fact, I used it in this office as well instead of sheetrock. So with sheetrock, as you know, the theory is, just one getting wet one time, it's all paper, that right there can create a mold situation. So with DINS glass, it's fiberglass with this special coating, and there's not any paper in it. So it is not completely mold proof, but is very mold resistant. So if that, had been getting wet over time, which there was a wet spot, and that was their whole thing, is that there was no mold on the DINS glass. Well, that's not where the mold was. It was inside the dryer vent, and or the run. It wasn't on the DINS glass. So I do think those are things that it did right. I mean, those are things, building out of cement, not having any wood, if you can live in a place that has low humidity, but, and interviewing your builder. I mean, mine, had won all these, our house is a LEED gold house, but that doesn't mean that somebody knows how to actually build a mold-proof house, right? And the idea that there were all of these emails showing the plans, we hired an engineer, he drew the plans, and everybody ignored it. And I even changed my contract. So just back to, if you are going to build a house, two things that I changed in my contract that definitely helped me out was, in most all building contracts, I even did it in the one to build this office building, it says, that up to the builder's discretion, they can make minor adjustments in the field. And I scratched that out. I mean, they literally couldn't move a light switch without getting, now, they did do several things without getting it approved by me, obviously, because in many cases, it can be left up to the expert, quote unquote, the installer of the HVAC system to make modifications in the field. Well, my contract said there can be no modifications made without my approval, not even a light switch. So highly recommend you do that because they said, oh, well, they made a modification in the field. Well, my contract said they couldn't. And two, we had engineering plans and we have emails showing that you received the engineering plans. And two, of course, there was some exclusion to mold in my contract. And I said, okay, well, if it's, caused by nature, but if it's caused by your negligence, and I changed that in the contract. And these two things, now he didn't have the proper insurance coverage, which is how we ended up in a lawsuit. Had he had the proper insurance coverage, perhaps it would have been different. But, I changed these two things in my contract to protect myself. And I tell you what,
Brilliant.
that it helped. And so, it was their negligence because there were plans and they didn't look at the plans. They sent the plans and they didn't look at the plans. So, I think just taking a step back to, interviewing your builder and, understanding what their true expertise is, not what their stated or marketing expertise is, and, looking at your contract, seeing how you can ensuring, and what I would have done in this case is to know what their mold limits were. So they only had 100,000, and that covered the cleaning of my house, not, anything else. And I didn't even get into all the actual construction defects in my home. I still have mini splits that don't work, and they didn't put a vent in the fireplace. So, the list is endless of actual problems that didn't have anything to do with mold, just bad building. And, but then looking at your contract and seeing how you can protect yourself. And in this case, I would have requested we requested certain liability coverage, but we didn't request certain mold coverage. It's kind of silly that he got that amount knowing he was well aware who he was building the house for and why he was building the house. So, he didn't protect himself enough. And so, getting higher mold limits if you can. And really, in this situation, why I did what I did, which was to hold the builder accountable, and I did that really not only for myself because I was out of pocket multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars, but I did that because there are so many people who are unable to do that. And I felt that it was my duty, because I had the knowledge and I had the finances to go toe-to-toe with this builder, that I needed to do it for other people, because we know of so many builders. And, mine was ready to, leave me and did leave me with not only this mold situation, but so many construction defects. And there actually was a review of another project that he did on Google, and I reached out to the person who did it, and he didn't have the finances. He had all these leaks. Same thing. It got a lemon from this builder, and didn't have the finances to go to bat and to hold this person accountable. And that's, I think, the other amongst many problems with building. But so few people either have the fortitude to do. What I went through in this lawsuit, they tried to make it personal about me, digging up anything that they could find as if it was relevant. We have a contract. You didn't adhere to the contract. You have construction defects. You didn't fix them. I had to pay out of pocket for them. And they're suddenly asking, if I've ever had a Diet Dr. Pepper in my life. And when I mentioned in an interview with you that I had done EMDR for some childhood trauma, they asked my therapist in deposition if I had been sexually abused as a child and made those leaps. So the level of trauma that I personally went through to hold this builder accountable, forget the time, forget the money, the literal trauma that I went through in these depositions in order to hold this person accountable, most people don't have that fortitude. And if they have the finances, they don't have the fortitude. And I just felt like I needed to do this, not only for myself, but I needed to do this for all the other voices that couldn't speak up and hold somebody accountable, and hope that this will never happen to anybody again. That's really, at the end of the day.
Well, and this industry has to change. There has to be some accountability between the environmental building scientists and the builders to actually create healthy environments in the homes. When you combine the mold with all the outgassing of the materials, our houses, our workplaces are making us sick.
Yes.
So the only way it's going to change is to actually hold some accountability. Mm-hmm. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
I saw you going through it. I just amazed at your fortitude.
Well, thank you. Again, it was really tough, but I just, the thing is how far an apology would have gone and to just fix it. We didn't even need to be there, right? I mean, in life, people make mistakes. And I am a very principled person, and so I believe in doing the right thing. And in this situation, a simple, my God, I'm sorry. We didn't look at the plans. Here's where we are. We're going to make this right for you. And it all could have been avoided. I mean, it happened. And in life, things are going to happen to us. And it just didn't need to get as bad as it got to where they were personally attacking me.
I think that's part of the trauma too, Amy. That's so hard.
Yeah.
Rather than taking ownership, apologizing, making it right, to be attacked instead, it's really, really hard.
That was the other principled part of it was, I wanted to say to him, and maybe one day he'll listen to this, you already reduced me to nothing. For 6 months of my life, I couldn't work. I couldn't get on an airplane. You got me. You didn't like me. You wanted to ruin me. You did it. You didn't need to continue to attack me. You just could have done the right thing, and we could have moved on with life. I mean, attacking me in that moment only fueled my fire to make sure that I was going to prevail in the end versus reducing me. You already reduced me to nothing. I'm a person that is high achieving, traveled the world, and I literally had to fly my husband and my child to Austin to pick me up and take me home. That's about as low as it gets in my life, And so this other, accusing, making up stories about me and all these things was just, fueling my fire to hold you accountable.
Shows another broken system, the legal system. But
yeah,
the fact that you can do that in the legal system.
Well, yeah, that's a whole nother, really I didn't have an attorney for a while, so I was dealing with their attorney, and I think he thought I was going to roll over, and I stood up to him, and so he decided he didn't like me either. And so he wasn't really keeping the insurance company abreast, we don't believe, of what the situation was. So once the mediator got in and all the insurance companies and they realized they are up a creek without a paddle, they quickly said, what can we do to not have to go to arbitration? So luckily, we didn't do that. But anyway, so yes, you can also get PTSD from mold, toxicity. It can be not just simply the physical, right? And so I think for me, that was new. I have again, they're trying to dig up stuff. I was like, you can have access to all of my medical records. I have no history of ever, having counseling or, EMDR or any of these things other than, briefly after my mother died. So have at it. Here are all my medical records. There's no history here that's a mystery. This is directly related to what has happened to me here.
And it is so common to have depression, anxiety, OCD, insomnia. So the brain effects, the neurochemical effects to mold can be so profound. And I find that most people really do benefit from some level of meditation, neurofeedback, limbic retraining, EMDR, something to really help to reset their nervous systems.
And I know you've done a number of those things. So what are some things that have helped you over the years?
So when I couldn't breathe in most of the buildings in Austin, forget traveling, staying in a hotel from the asthma, it was so severe. So I'm a long-term meditator. I've been exploring different aspects of meditation. I know you have an interest in that too, pretty much my whole adult life. But I did a brain map at one of the conferences, and she came over and because I was thinking about getting some neurofeedback equipment in the office, and her eyes were going to pop out of her head. Just like, Dr. Shippy, what's wrong with you? So I was in just high beta, like run from the tiger state, even though I was supposed to be meditating while I was doing this brain map.
And you always seem so calm. At least compared to me. I'm always like, if you want to see the hurricane, come to my clinic. If you want to go to calm and peaceful, go to Anne.
That's so funny. So it's like, oh, should I spend the 20 grand on this equipment? And then I went to one of Jeff Bland's conferences, and they were introducing a lot of these handhelds at the time, it's like 2016 timeframe. And I learned about the Muse, which is a little neurofeedback device that you can do at home for like $300 in your own space. So I bought one of those, and I'm like, I'm going to try that first. And I just did it day after day. It was my commitment to myself. I would do this 20 minutes every morning. If I was running kids around, it might be 5, but did it pretty much every morning and got myself into a reset brain state where I could actually be calm on the inside again and not just look like I was in the calm state. So it really, really saved me to do this for about a year. But then I also have a fascination with the brain training that can be customized for you. So the neurofeedback, I still don't have it in my office. I bought all the equipment now, and I do it on myself at home, but it's a whole effort to get the right expertise to really do it well. So I've done 40 years of Zen 4 times now over the years. I go every couple of years to do a week of intensive neurofeedback. And then my friend Drew Pearson also does some very personalized trainings that you can go do in San Diego. And I feel like and then I'm also experimenting with a new handheld called Sensei, which...
Do you like that?
I do like it. Yes.
I asked Hasi about it. He was...
Well, he's a snob.
Okay.
Because he's got all the really intensive.
Right, I know,
this is
of
like
course.
the average person can do it at home.
No, I saw the ads and definitely wanted to give it a try.
I'm really enjoying that too.
Okay.
So for me, doing the neurofeedback where I'm retraining my brain on how I adapt to stress, like especially after doing that year of the Muse, I had teenagers at the time. So I could tell that the way I responded to them was better. There's one specific instance where my son, he was driving at the time, and so he had driven to soccer practice, and another kid had hopped on the hood of his car, and instead of stopping the car, he kept driving.
Oh, my gosh.
The coach called me. He was going slow, but still,
right.
As an ER doc and
Yes.
me spending years and years admitting the sickest patients in the ER was like, oh, my God. So I could take a breath and actually talk to him about it rather than, reacting to what was going on, which just leads to a better result with teenage boys. So I was really grateful for even that improvement in how my body responds to stress.
And let's talk about, because you travel a lot, I travel a lot. What are the things that you do to protect yourself, so to speak, when you're traveling? Or just in your everyday life here in Austin, so many buildings are. But besides the, neurofeedback and things like that, are there things that you do and that you think about?
So I have some of the genetic predisposition with how my body detoxifies, as well as the very inflamed, can respond very quickly to what my body perceives as threats. So I sometimes will travel with my carry-on full of supplements so that I have plenty of things to help support me with binders, and liposomal glutathione is the form that works best for me. And then lots of anti-inflammatory kinds of things like curcumin and ECGC and the mix. And then my body, especially when it's being exposed to toxins, and it can even be the jet fuel fumes on the airplane. Sometimes you can have that toxic smell when they're sitting on the runway. Or the really long flights to Europe and other places, my body really needs extra minerals. So I take a product called Quinton's and then some type of electrolytes to really load up my system. And then depending on the trip and how much choice I have to where I'm staying, will try to get the the newest or remodeled hotel so that at least there's the likelihood that there hasn't been the accumulation of humidity and toxins and leaks, which works sometimes, but not all the time. So far I've been doing pretty well lately. Like I haven't had to change hotels in a while. There was a conference that we were at last summer that I should have changed hotels because my Raynaud's flared within 2 days of getting there. Like just even holding a glass of room temperature water would be enough to get the Raynaud's kicked off. But now I know what to do. And then there's some IVs that I do in the office that also really help me, IV phosphatidylcholine and NAD. My last really big hit, I did an NAD IV the day that I got back and I was back on track. But I know not everybody has access to those, but if you do, they can make a huge, huge difference if you've had a huge, huge hit.
Yeah. Yeah. I always, like you, I mean, I really look for the new hotel. And if you can get a hotel, which is so rare these days, that has windows that can open or a balcony, I mean, usually it's really the older hotels that have those things. So for me, I would rather be exposed to the off-gassing of new materials than to be in a moldy situation. And so I literally, there's a website you can Google. It's like new hotels of literally anywhere you want to go. And they tell you the years that all the hotels in that city have been built.
I was so grateful that you told me this strategy because I just got back from a trip with my niece to Edinburgh and to London, which is, pretty much every building's old.
Right.
So I was able to find a brand new building in Edinburgh and then a remodeled one in London, and they were perfect.
Well, awesome.
So thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes to remodeled, you need to, when I saw, a hotel in New Orleans was in an old building, but it was like a, $58 million remodel. Well, they took out the air conditionings in that situation and they literally gutted the building. There are other hotels where sometimes the remodel is just changing the paint and the carpeting and the AC units are the same. So I do think, if you need to distinguish, is this a complete remodel or is this just, sort of a, just putting lipstick on a pig, as they sometimes say, remodel. And so newer places, I unfortunately pretty much avoid the beach these days unless it is a new building because, that can just be so, it's very difficult to find a place at the beach that is not moldy even after a couple of years.
And if I find one, I keep going back there.
Right, until you can't, right?
You can.
Right?
Yeah.
So we have our IFM conference coming up, and we had it's at the Bellagio, and Elle and I had gone, and they just remodeled and the AC units and everything, the spa wing. So I've alerted everybody that I know that's going that has mold sensitivity to definitely stay in the spa wing.
We'll all have our rooms together.
Yes, we'll all have our rooms together. But, the joke in my house is, all the luggage and everything stays downstairs. I go up, check the room. Is the room okay? And then, it's like, then we can bring in the luggage. Because Javier learned so long ago just to, we would, even on a particular floor, different rooms can have problems or not. And then, of course, different floors can have problems. So it's, I guess if you're getting an Airbnb, you can, have access to fresh air with windows and things like that. Potentially, if you can, sort of tell when the house has been built or whatever.
I honestly have had better luck with hotels than I have had Airbnbs, but
yeah, I don't do Airbnbs that often myself. I do better with a hotel. Well, anything that you feel like we haven't covered in terms of molds?
The thing that I want to leave our listeners with is weaving the history of what we've both been through with the autoimmune diseases, me with the neurological things, you with the mast cell and chemical sensitivities, that your body's amazing and it can heal. Like I especially with the neurological things that I thought were just going to take me out. It's like, who's going to raise my kids, right? I'm better than ever. So I think just knowing in your core how amazing your body is and how it can recover is just extraordinary. And I'm so grateful that I've had these experiences, that when I'm sitting with patients and I see them going through these horrific things that are so hard, or holding your being, and yet as you're traveling through these things, I know without a shadow of a doubt that you're going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say the same thing. I mean, just, particularly just that nothing other than the other humans and live animals in your home is worth the potential exposure. And, as long as you're willing to get rid of it or leave, you can be healed. I mean, I remember when I was practicing, had a woman who was having to sleep outside. And I just said, I've been there. I literally slept for a month on a balcony. Like, you can heal if you're willing to, either try to remediate this or get out and leave everything behind. You can heal. Now, sometimes it's not that extreme, and it also depends on the person. Like, you and I have, had our thing, Suzanne, who we're so thankful for. If you ever see this, Suzanne, we love you. And
we do. So grateful.
We do love Suzanne. She even came up to my house. I flew her up. She hadn't been on a plane in I don't know how many years, and she came up to Santa Fe for me. So we love you, Suzanne. That there are people who are more sensitive. There may be people less sensitive, people more sensitive than you, and to always sort of keep that in check. I mean, that's, Suzanne's gasping for air, and I feel fine, I'm just sort of, keeping that in check of how is it affecting you, and, what is your tolerance, and, the willingness, if it is really bad, to, leave things behind. I mean, in my situation, this most recent one with my daughter, things that if they had been mine, would have gotten rid of. But there were certain things, like certain stuffed animals, you can't buy another one. Her blankie, I mean, they're things that you just cannot replace, or they would know, right? That this is a 2-year-old stuffed animal versus a brand new one. And so, the things that I tried to salvage for her were way more extensive than I didn't really try to salvage anything for me, right? And so, just being cognizant of that, of what can you salvage, how do you feel, and that honestly, other than other living beings, there's nothing worth your health, and you absolutely can recover.
Yeah, you're making me think of a situation that just happened with my son, who's in college now, where he had a duplex with 3 other boys, and it took to like the end of that first semester, they had a 2-year lease, or the first year, for me to realize that 3 out of the 4 boys were getting affected by mold in the place. One had to have a major sinus surgery. One actually dropped out of school for a semester because he was feeling so dark. And then my son was just having infections and brain fog. And we found that, over the summer, we found that there was a pretty massive mold problem in a pretty new building. It was just a few years old because they had way over-designed the air conditioning system. It was like 100% over-designed, so it never dehumidified. So I gave him the choice, do you want to try to clean your stuff, or do you want to live leaner, right? He had accumulated some of the, some nice suits and things for their formals and all those kinds of things. And he's like, I'll start over. Like, he made that decision for himself, but with the little one, it's so hard because they don't understand it. But he was like, no, I don't want to risk moving, because it was that Getomium that's really hard to clean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with Elle, I just certain things I didn't want her to have to choose, right? Certain stuffed animals, things like that I, didn't want her to have to choose. And other things, that they said I couldn't clean, like Barbies because of the hair and stuff like that. I just said, some of your toys we had to, I did explain, she knows, mommy gets sick with mold, water, if there's ever, even though we have, tile floors and, somewhat of a bomb-proof house, if water spills on the floor, we clean it up right away. I mean, she knows, water and mommy generally don't do well together. And so, there were certain things I just didn't give her the choice. It was like, oh, look, you had these 4 princesses. Let's go out and get the whole pack of all 10 princesses, And again, she was small enough that, I really feel like it's not a traumatic thing in her life, which was my singular goal, was that this was not a traumatic event in her life that was going to follow her through her whole life. And I do feel proud of myself that I was able to do that. I don't think, she doesn't really understand. Well, I feel like there's so many things that have come up, like, how to deal with teenagers and mold, how to, when do you let your child, begin to make their own decisions versus knowing that. So we may have to, move this into part 2 of a conversation, because I think with your son, he didn't have you come look at the place. He just found it with his friends, or
Right, and thought it was fine because it was pretty new.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it probably was fine at the time because it was so
Right,
new.
because they weren't using the water. I mean, that's the other thing that can happen when you're looking at a new home is, if the water hasn't been being used, if the shower hasn't been being used, then you don't know that the shower pan, is the problem. So, the other thing when you're buying a home, I do recommend that you get it tested. And we could do a whole talk on, on testing of the person and testing of the home. But quickly to say that you don't want to be doing air testing. You want to be doing swab testing and looking for mycotoxins and dust. I mean, obviously, if you do an air test and it's positive, you've got problems. But there's so many problems with those tests that they're not even picking up mycotoxins.
And there's a whole bunch of information on my website now.
Oh, yes.
We have
I say this in the most loving way, the queen of mold. So tell people where they can find you and all the resources that you have for them.
So you just go to AnnShippyMD.com, and we actually have made a whole mold hub page because
Great.
There's only so many people that can actually come see me. And I feel like there's just been such a wealth of information that's come through with helping so many patients and family and friends over the years that we've made a lot of that information available on the website so that people at least know how to get started. And my favorite thing is when people let me know, hey, I did what you said on your website and I got better.
Yeah.
So that's a place that people can start.
And you have an ebook as well, a mold ebook. Is that Amazon? Ann Shippy book?
Shippy
Dr.
and
Ann Shippy
mold
book?
toxicity,
Okay.
and you'll find it.
Okay. Not everyone is affected in the way that you and I are affected. So there are people who can, in many cases, do simple strategies. Take the glutathione, take the charcoal, remediate the bathroom only, pull up the carpet. I mean, all the, things, and can get better. So, you and I are in a subset of the population that have genetic SNPs that don't allow us to clear these mycotoxins. And so we do get very, very sick. And so we are in a subset of the population. But if you are going to a physician and they aren't someone well-versed in mold and you are not getting the answers that you need, do think about mold toxicity and find someone like Ann who can help you, or Ann's resources.
Yes, thanks.
And
we're here to help.
And social media, where can people find you?
Oh, just Ann Shippy MD, mostly on Instagram. We've been working on Pinterest a lot lately too, so those are the 2 main places, a little bit on Facebook, a little bit on LinkedIn, but mostly Instagram. We try to get a good post out there every couple of days, and there's lots of mold information on Instagram.
Well, Ann, thank you so much. I'm so thankful for you. I might still be living in a sea of autoimmunity if I had never met you and clued into mold. So thank you. And thanks for being a friend, too.
Such a good friend.
Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I want to thank this week's guests for sharing their time and knowledge. And thank you for listening. To read the full show notes for each episode, which include a summary, timestamp, quotes, and any resources mentioned, please visit amymyersmd.com/podcast. Lastly, if you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love if you would leave a rating and a review on Apple or Spotify, and we'll select a few to read out loud in a future episode. Tune in next week to hear from another inspiring guest as we help you take back your health.